Yeah, so hi, I'm Nick. I think I know many of you, so it's probably not new. I also work at Mainmatter, just like Chris, and I'm gonna show you around Ember Mirage a little bit. Yeah, so most of you probably know Mirage JS. It's an API mocking library. It's been around in the Ember ecosystem, or it came into existence within the Ember ecosystem and was later extracted into a general purpose library. Why do we want to use Mirage? It's meant to help you write tests that are representative of your real API in kind of a focused way. You can use it in a way that API data is seeded per test or per group of tests. And that should normally mean, in our experience at least, that the tests are easy to write, navigate, and maintain. It's also quite easy with this tool to temporarily stop browse during a test. So if you need to do any kind of error handling that you need to test, that's quite straightforward to do. Backend also doesn't need to exist yet. I was kind of surprised that that actually was the main marketing on the Mirage JS website. Like I didn't even, I mean, it's nice if you have like a strong API contract, you can already start coding your front end and your tests before the backend might be ready. It's quite nice when working in parallel with the backend team. And yeah, in my experience, your experience may be different, but I've worked with a couple of code bases with elaborate API recording setups. Mirage is a lot less frustrating to work with. The recording setups that I've used tended to have very large tests that are very difficult to work with or refactor when needed. Data needs to either already exist in the backend or needs to be created from the test by either user interaction or whatever. Yeah, and it's not always easy to distill the information you need about whatever API request might be happening from a recorded response. These file formats are not really meant to be read by humans necessarily. There's a lot of extra overhead in those files. And finally, adjusting a test often also means that you have to re-record, which takes more time. That was the rant about recording setups. Let's continue. So what we are used to in the Ember world is ember-cli-mirage. That's the original add-on from which Mirage JS was extracted. And until recently, or maybe you're still doing this, we would really just Ember install ember-cli-mirage and then be ready to write our tests. This worked very well until now. Why until now? Well, because of Vite. We all want Vite. And unfortunately, ember-cli-mirage doesn't work with that. But the community came up with a solution, or maybe even Chris, remind me, did this come out of the Embroider initiative? I don't really remember.
We discussed it many times on Ember tooling team meetings
Tooling
during
team.
the Embroider initiative. So kind of, a little bit, not exactly.
Yeah. It's fine. It exists. It's good that we have it. So yeah, the community came up with, or maybe it was Brian, we don't know, Ember Mirage, which is much closer to the native Mirage JS experience, and basically it provides a bunch of utilities that we're used to from ember-cli-mirage. And it's really up to you whether or not you need those. You can also choose to implement Mirage JS directly yourself. But in this case, I'm gonna show how it's done with Vite and Ember Mirage. Some of the utilities that are provided are around Ember Data. Do note that this is mostly around classic Ember Data, not all the fancy warp drive stuff that Ember Data Chris has been showing. Although it shouldn't be very hard to support those either, I think. Ember Mirage is Embroider and Vite compatible. And apart from the Ember Data related utilities, it also provides QUnit integration. Yeah, as I mentioned, this add-on is definitely not mine, although I did contribute, it seems. I think Brian owns it. He's in there twice. Don't know why. Preston, of course. Chris also did a bunch of stuff and various other people. So yeah, you can find it on GitHub. So now let's get going. It's a little bit more work to set up. We can't be as automatic anymore as with V1 add-ons. So yeah, let's dive in and see what that looks like. We'll start, and this is not obligatory, but this is how I started with this, by creating a default server configuration in the /mirage/service folder. And this, in the case of a Vite app, as I discovered this morning, needs to actually be outside the app folder, or otherwise it will be bundled in production, even if you use Embroider macros. If you're in a classic app or maybe a Webpack Embroider build as well, I don't know, haven't tried, it might actually need to be in the app folder, but it would be correctly not bundled if you use the Embroider macros. We'll get to that later. This config can be very simple. In this case, I'm really only calling create server from Mirage JS itself and pass on the config, and we'll add the rest of our configuration later. So the first thing we're going to do is use the create config utility from, I didn't put the import here, but this is a utility that's actually provided by Ember Mirage. Combined with import meta glob, we can kind of recreate the automatic importing of all the various Mirage modules that you can create that ember-cli-mirage provided. This includes factories, fixtures, models, serializers, and identity managers. This way you don't need to create a big barrel file or whatever. It's good to know that import meta glob is a Vite feature. So if you don't have Vite, you will need to do something else. I have set this up in a classic app. And you can do this with a Webpack allow app imports and the required context. It's a little more involved than this, but it does work. If you need more info, just ask in the channel or me directly on Discord. Let's see. There's also some polyfills around for import meta glob before people say, have you seen the polyfills? But unfortunately, the polyfills that I tried don't work in Ember auto import Webpack land, only in the true classic build. And we needed to be in the auto import land for the Mirage thing to correctly not be bundled in production. So hopefully the polyfills will be fixed up in the near future so that we can also use import meta glob in that situation. The configuration that create config generates can just be spread into the create server config as I'm doing there. Next, I tend to be lazy. So in this case, at least, I like generating the Mirage models from the Ember Data models instead of manually defining them. If you've done this before, Mirage models really only need the relationships. There's no attributes in those definitions. So a utility is provided by Ember Mirage called import Ember Data models, which we can use. We need to pass it again, an import meta glob of all the models in the app. This is also a relative path. I think for import meta glob, it needs to be a relative path even. So you can't do any fancy app name kind of deal here. Yeah, we import those. And then down in the config, I pass it and the Ember Data store into the import Ember Data models utility. And that's because the import Ember Data models utility needs to look up these models in the Ember Data store to be able to get the proper relationship information. You can also see that at the top of the make server there, I'm doing a little trick. I'm not sure if this is supposed to work because I saw an open issue on Ember Mirage saying, oh, store is not passed in this specific scenario. What I've done to work around this is like you can run Mirage both in your app instead of your backend as well as in your tests. In case of the app, I expect the app when creating the Mirage server to manually pass in the Ember Data store. And if we don't get a passed in store, we assume we're in a test context and dynamically import from Ember test help us get context .owner lookup the Ember Data store. This is a bit convoluted, so I hope we can make this easier, but it works for now. Then finally, in this configuration, we can define our routes. In practice, you probably want to organize these in a separate folder structure as well, but I don't think ember-cli-mirage ever provided any kind of convention around that, so that's really up to the user. Then to our test helper, it's pretty common to have a custom variant of setup Mirage to use in your tests. In this case, we create an options object, passing it the make server that we created before from /mirage/server/default. And we call the upstream setup Mirage with this configuration. And we also need to make sure that we set the environment to test in this case. This is not done automatically. Since this is a test helper, the environment should always be test, I think. That's why I explicitly passed it here. And this is a configuration option for the main Mirage JS library. And there's some different behavior in how it loads fixtures or factories or whatnot, depending on the environment you set here. And then in your tests, it's really just as the usual. You import your setup Mirage helper that we just created. You call it at the top of your QUnit module. And then it's identical to old-fashioned Mirage setups. We can create models in our server. We can request them with the Ember Data store and run assertions. You can also see that I've very explicitly named the variables Mirage user and Ember Data user, because it's quite common for people to confuse the two and try to pass Mirage models to components. And that might work sometimes partially, but can get very confusing very fast. And this helper can, of course, be used in all kinds of tests. Like in this case, it's a unit test, but this also works in integration and acceptance tests. Then this is a little more complex. If we want to use this Mirage server in our app, which might be a little rarer, like it's not something that many people do in practice nowadays, I think. But if you want to run the app with your Mirage server as the backend, we can make use of the Embroider macros package with a macro condition to only load it in the specific case of a developing app and not testing, because the testing will provide its own Mirage server. And then I've also added an extra configuration variable, use Mirage, which is tied up to an environment variable so that the developer can toggle this on or off. After that bit, it's really the same deal. We import our Mirage server configuration with the dynamic import. We create it with an environment development in this case, and also pass a scenario. I haven't shown the scenario yet. I can show that in a real demo in a sec. The scenarios are really just functions that seed the Mirage database. And here you can also see that we pass in the Ember Data store that I mentioned before. And finally, we turn on the server logging, because in development, there's not really any reason why you wouldn't want to see the Mirage records. The Mirage requests responses in the console. So a quick demo. Yeah, so here I have a Vite app. This was generated with the, what's it called? Embroider app blueprint, probably 2 weeks ago, maybe. I did update things a little bit in between, but I don't think too much changed. So here on the left, you can see we have our Mirage folder. I have a user factory, which doesn't do much. My scenario for the app. So
Are
we
you
create a
able
user.
to zoom in just a teeny bit there?
Oh,
I don't know if you're
yeah.
able to do that.
Not for the sidebar, I think, but I can do it for the
Yeah,
code.
no, that's good. Thanks.
Cool. So I create a user, some comments, and that's it. Serializer just stating that it's a JSON API, because we all love JSON API almost as much as Vite. And then finally the server configuration. So here you can see I'm importing the Ember Data models. Which I think, let's check, there should be, yeah, there's 2 Ember Data models here with a relationship. And this is the Mirage module import. It might be good to know, that's actually something I had to work around, that right now there's an issue with the implementation of this utility, that it doesn't work with nested modules. So let's say you have a folder within your factories or Ember Data models even, it won't register those properly. That's also why the glob doesn't do that here. It's pretty easy to work around. I will hopefully get to making a PR very soon to fix that. Yeah, down here is the full configuration that we walked through. And I was lazy again at the bottom and used the this.resource shortcut to get a full like CRUD user endpoint. Oh, no, get out of the way, Zoom. Zoom is blocking my tabs. Chris, how do I get rid of the little bar?
I'm sure you can minimize it, but you can also drag it, but I can't see it, so I can't help you.
Yeah, you can't see it. Oh no.
But you should be able to drag it out of the way.
I can drag it. Now it's just in the way in a different place. Yeah, here's our setup Mirage test helper. There's actually another useful thing that isn't in Ember Mirage yet, but we should really add it. This is something that I found in one of Preston's gists. And this whole thing, this is actually a limitation of old Ember CLI-Mirage. If something breaks within your Mirage route handler implementation, it will just return a 500 without a clear reason for why it breaks. So debugging that can be a little hard sometimes. This piece of code will log a nice stack trace with a direct link to your code that broke or that threw an error, which makes debugging it a little easier. I really do think we should add this as an option, at least to Ember Mirage as well, as it's part of a better development experience. Yeah, and then here I have a simple test, which is slightly different. Yeah, we don't have enough Chris's in the Ember world, so that's why I named the user Chris. It's slightly different, but mostly the same as the one from the presentation. And then in the app, yeah, you can see here, so this QUnit integration here is also provided by Ember Mirage. It's the old Mirage logging checkbox that we're used to from Ember CLI Mirage. If we click that, we'll see that the Mirage request responses show up in the console. Oh, sorry, can I zoom in here? Yeah. Which is useful, I guess. And then in the app as well, they will also log here. Yeah. Yeah, so as I mentioned, there's some caveats with Ember Mirage. It's still under active development. The documentation isn't perfect yet. That's also something that I hope we can improve soon. It's a little confusing on how to exactly set it up, which is part of the reason why I'm doing this talk, I guess. I should have written documentation instead, maybe. Or both. Yeah, and the main other caveat is that setup and usage is slightly different in the classic and Viteless apps, which I think we should also make very clear in the documentation. It can work well in all circumstances, and it's also very easy to swap between them, so to say. The utilities are built in a way that you can swap out import metaglob with a custom required context-based kind of thing for Webpack. So this shouldn't really stop you from using this, in my opinion. And that's it. Thanks. And one final shout out, this presentation was made with auto review, which was my first time using it. Another thing Chris made. It's very nice to use. So thanks for that.